Our planet has reached the highest temperature in 3 million years. Although the best way to slow climate change is to reduce greenhouse emissions by switching to clean energy, the carbon dioxide already in the atmosphere will continue the warming effects for centuries. To impact climate change, we need solutions that are able to massively scale carbon removal. Planetary Technologies from Halifax, Canada, has a solution that accelerates the ocean's already existing ability to remove carbon from the air and regulate global temperatures. So Mike, what is the challenge we're facing with respect to the acidification of oceans?
We're putting a lot more CO2 into the atmosphere. And the oceans in the atmosphere live like mirrors of each other when it comes to the concentration of CO2. So if we put more CO2 in the atmosphere, we're going to get more CO2 into our oceans. That just happens. It sort of dissolves in there and it balances everything out. The problem is that CO2 is an acid. And as an acid, it acidifies our oceans. And so it creates this additional acid in the oceans and takes us to a point where it's not as hospitable for the life in the oceans. And that's especially true of anything that makes a shell. So what we call calcifying organisms, or anything that forms some hard structure. Like here in Atlantic Canada, we talk about lobsters a lot, but you might think about corals, and corals are really heavily hit by this. And this is a really big deal, right? Because about 500 million people around the world rely on corals for their livelihoods. Ocean acidification, big challenge.
And at Planetary, you've developed a solution to try to overcome this challenge. Can you take us through end-to-end how the solution works?
So essentially what we do is we take a really mild, very pure antacid, just like you would have to cure a stomachache. And we put that into the ocean. Yeah, so we've got this acidified ocean. Our ocean has kind of like heartburn. We put our antacid into seawater. And what that really does is it neutralizes some of that acid. And that, just like any antacid would neutralize the acid. But the acid that we're neutralizing is CO2. And so as we neutralize that acid, we're essentially turning it into a very mild form of a base. So we're turning it into basically baking soda. And the neat thing about ocean chemistry, it's got this really neat property, which is that bicarbonate, it actually lives in seawater for 100,000 years.
Wow.
So it's this like permanent storage place for carbon, but because we've neutralized the CO2, we're making more space. And so since the atmosphere and the ocean are mirrors of each other, more CO2 comes out of the atmosphere and goes into the ocean. And it forms sort of like a little conveyor belt. So the other side of our process, and what we have to do in order to do this, is we have to produce this antacid. And that antacid, we have to produce it in massive quantities.
Sort of like ocean scale.
Ocean
challenge.
Scale and climate scale, right? So when we talk about climate scale, we think about, we're failing in terms of dealing with our emissions right now. We're not quite there yet. So we've got to do what's called carbon dioxide removal, or CDR. We have to do that on the scale of billions and billions and billions of tons per year by 2050.
One of the things that's most aspirational for entrepreneurs around the world is to be involved with the X Prize. And you've been successful with an Elon Musk funded X Prize. How did you meet the criteria and how did you win that?
It's the largest X Prize of all time. So it's a $100 million X Prize, which will be finally awarded in 2025. And of course, we're going to win it. I mean, that's obvious. Of course. It was a really, really challenging application process. We had to put together reams of documentation. It had to be third-party verified. We had to go through engineers and techno-economics. We had to look at the environmental impact.
Very holistic.
Holistic across the board. And you really had to be able to say, this is a solution that could eventually scale up to those billions and billions and billions of tons
the global
of CO2.
Problem.
Yeah.
Tackle the global problem.
Yeah, to get to that scale. And winning it to us is this check mark that says, we believe you can make it. Which is, you can't, as a startup, you can't get anything better.